Under the bright Nebraska snow, a former Navy SEAL stood beside a refrigerated truck. The paperwork looked perfect, the seal was untouched, and the driver kept saying it was nothing. Then the cooling engine stopped, and Conrad heard a faint scratch from inside. Not metal shifting, not cargo settling. Something alive was asking to be heard. Behind a false wall of pallets, he would find a German shepherd marked with a code instead of a name. That one quiet sound would uncover a hidden route, a forgotten warning, and a man learning how to trust again. Listen to Ridge and Conrad's story, then tell us where you're watching from. And please like and subscribe to help SEAL K9 Tales reach 5,000 subscribers so we can keep writing stories like this. Snow had a way of making Nebraska look innocent. It fell over the flat country in soft, silver sheets covering the dark fields, the fence posts, the tired shoulders of the interstate, and the long black scars left by truck tires. Under the yellow lights of the Federal Way Station near the I-80 junction, every flake seemed to glow for half a second before vanishing against concrete and steel. Conrad Vail stood beneath that light, with his collar turned up and his breath rising in pale clouds. At 52, he still carried the shape of a man built by discipline. Broad shoulders, a lean military frame, movements kept small and exact. His dark brown hair had grown longer than regulations would have allowed, pushed back by the wind in a way that gave him a rough, almost old-world look. His face was clean-shaven, the square jaw and high cheekbones made sharper by the cold. His eyes, gray-blue and watchful, did not rest easily on anything. Not on the trucks, not on the road, not on the mirrors. Especially not on the mirrors. Every night before leaving his small rented house outside town, Conrad checked the rearview mirror 3 times. Not twice, not 4 times. 3. Then he checked both door locks. Then he paused in the kitchen and listened to the house settle. Only after that would he step outside. He knew the habit was not reason. It was ritual. But rituals had kept men alive before, or so the old part of him liked to whisper. That old part had been born far from Nebraska, in places where darkness had teeth and silence could be a warning. Conrad had once been a Navy SEAL. He did not say it often. People treated those words like a flag or a weapon or a story they wanted him to perform. He had no interest in performing. The uniform was gone. The deployments were done. What remained was lighter on paper and heavier in the bones. Sleep that broke apart before dawn, nerves that woke before the mind, and a sense that every room had to be mapped before it could be trusted. Now his battlefield was a row of inspection lanes, a digital scale, a windowed office, and a stretch of interstate where truckers rolled through with coffee cups, bad backs, and delivery deadlines. It was not heroic work. That was one of the reasons he liked it. The way station hummed around him. Diesel engines idled. Air brakes sighed. Tires hissed over wet pavement. Beyond the glass office, a strand of old holiday lights blinked red, green, and gold along the inside of the window. Marta Bell had put them there in December and refused to take them down. January needs miracles more than Christmas does, she had told Conrad earlier that evening while pouring coffee from a red thermos chipped along the bottom. Christmas has carols. January has taxes, ice, and men who think a sandwich from a gas station counts as dinner. Conrad had looked at the sandwich in his hand. Marta had looked at it too. Then she had said, "I rest my case." Marta was 56, short, sharp-eyed, and warm in the way a cast-iron stove was warm, useful, sturdy, and capable of burning anyone foolish enough to underestimate her. She ran the office side of the night shift, watched the screens, logged numbers, corrected forms, and argued with the printer as though it were a stubborn livestock animal. Conrad trusted her more than most people. That did not mean he told her much. The clock above the office door read 1:17 a.m. The storm had thinned from heavy snow to bright drifting powder. Visibility was poor, but not impossible. Trucks moved through the station one at a time, their headlights cutting tunnels through the mist. Conrad waved a flatbed through after a routine weight check, then stepped back toward the shelter of the inspection booth. He had almost reached the door when the next vehicle rolled toward the scale. A refrigerated container truck, white cab, long silver trailer, blue logo on the side, Northline Meridian Freight. Conrad narrowed his eyes, not because the company name meant anything to him yet, but because the truck itself seemed too clean for the weather. The trailer sides carried less road grime than expected, and the rear seal gleamed under the lights like it had been placed there by hands that wanted it noticed. The driver eased onto the scale. The digital numbers climbed, blinked, settled. A minor imbalance. Not enough to stop a careless inspector. Enough to interest Conrad. He stepped toward the driver's side. The window rolled down, letting out a gust of warm air and the stale smell of energy drinks. The man behind the wheel looked too young for the miles in his face. Late 20s, maybe. Thin, pale, with light brown hair crushed under a company cap. His hoodie was gray. His black Northline jacket hung loose around his shoulders. One hand gripped the steering wheel. The other rested near the gear shift, fingers tapping once, stopping, tapping again. "Evening," Conrad said. The driver swallowed. "Evening, sir." "Sir," not unusual, but the word came too fast. "Name?" "Casey Dunmore." "Cargo?" "Temperature-controlled food products, packaged proteins, distribution out of Des Moines." Conrad held out a gloved hand. "Paperwork." Casey handed the folder through the window. His fingers were cold despite the heated cab. Conrad stepped under the booth light and opened the documents. The bills were clean. The route was clean. The seal number matched the manifest. The cargo classification was ordinary enough to be boring. Packaged food products requiring controlled refrigeration. Not deep frozen freight, not medical, not livestock. Nothing dramatic. That was what bothered him. Clean paperwork had a texture. Real paperwork gathered tiny imperfections, a coffee stain, a rushed signature, a correction, a page folded the wrong way. These sheets looked like they had been printed for a judge. Marta's voice crackled through his radio. "Scale shows slight rear bias, nothing wild." Conrad pressed the button. "Copy." Casey leaned toward the window. "Am I good to go? I'm already behind schedule." Conrad did not look up right away. "Temperature set point says 36 degrees. "Yes, sir." "The reefer display read 31 when you rolled in." Casey blinked. "It fluctuates. Old unit." "Truck looks new." "Trailer's old." Conrad turned the page slowly. "Trailer serial says otherwise." For a moment, Casey's tapping hand stopped. Snow struck the brim of Conrad's cap and melted there. He looked at the driver, not hard, not theatrical, just long enough for the silence to find the weak seam. Casey forced a laugh. "I just drive what they assign me." That much might have been true. Conrad handed back only part of the folder and kept the manifest. "Stay parked on the scale." "Is there a problem?" "Routine secondary check." Casey's eyes shifted to the side mirror. It was a small movement. Most men would miss it. Conrad did not. He walked along the driver's side of the trailer, boots crunching in slush. The refrigerated unit rattled at the front, coughing out a steady mechanical growl. The sound filled the lane, harsh and cold, like a metal beast breathing through bad lungs. Conrad circled to the rear. The seal was intact. The locking bars were clean. The hinges were lightly frosted. He placed one gloved hand near the door, not touching the seal, just feeling the vibration. The refrigeration unit shuddered through the trailer wall. Pallets could shift, load straps could knock, ice could crack. 1,000 harmless noises lived inside freight. He knew that. Then the unit stopped. The sudden quiet came down like a hand over the mouth of the world. For 2 seconds, all Conrad heard was the whisper of snow and the distant murmur of engines on the interstate. Then came a sound from inside the trailer. Not loud, not dramatic. 3 faint scratches, a pause, then a low, broken whine. Conrad's body did not move, but something inside him stood up. The sound was so small it might have been dismissed by anyone eager to go home. It slipped through the door seam and vanished almost as soon as it arrived. But Conrad had spent too much of his life listening for what did not belong. A loose pallet knocked, a strap snapped, metal settled. Living things pleaded. He raised the radio slowly. "Marta? Yeah? Did you catch audio from lane 3? A pause. Keyboard clicking. Mostly reefer noise. Why? Mark the timestamp, 1:23. Inside the cab, Casey opened his door and climbed down too quickly. "It's cargo shift," he called. "Happens all the time. The pallets knock around." Conrad turned. Casey stood in the snow with his jacket half-zipped, his company cap pulled low, his breath coming too fast. He looked younger outside the truck. Younger and more frightened. "I didn't ask," Conrad said. Casey's mouth opened, closed. The refrigeration unit kicked back on with a hard metallic cough, swallowing the lane in noise again. Conrad walked toward him. "How long have you been driving this route?" "Few weeks." "For North Line?" 6 months. "This trailer loaded by you?" "No, sealed before pickup." "Who assigned the route?" Casey's eyes flicked again, not to Conrad this time, but to the trailer. "Dispatch." "Name?" "I don't know. Night dispatch." Conrad waited. The young man rubbed his thumb against a cheap steel ring on his finger. Once, twice, around and around. "Grady," Casey said finally. "Grady Osmond. He handles some refrigerated routes." Marta's voice came through the radio again, softer now. "Conrad, you want me to call Leland?" Conrad looked at the trailer door. He did not want Leland. Leland Cross managed the night shift from a back office where the heater worked too well and the blinds stayed half closed. He liked smooth reports, clean numbers, and trucks moving through without argument. He was not lazy. That would have been simpler. He was polished, careful, the kind of man who could place a paper over a crack in the wall and call the room repaired. "Call him," Conrad said, "and save the lane feed." Marta understood the second part more than the first. "Already doing it." Casey stepped closer. "Sir, I really need to move. They'll dock me if I'm late." Conrad almost felt sorry for him. Almost? There were men who did wrong because cruelty sat comfortably in them. There were others who carried wrong like a hot coal, burning their own hands while they insisted it was nothing. Casey looked like the second kind. That made him dangerous in a different way. "Back in the cab," Conrad said. "Please, it's just—" "Back in the cab." The words were quiet. They landed anyway. Casey obeyed. Conrad walked to the inspection booth and took down the body camera from its charging hook. He clipped it to his jacket and turned it on. The red light blinked once, then held steady. Marta watched from behind the glass, her gray-streaked hair pinned with a red clip, her face no longer joking. She lifted the office phone to her ear. A minute later, Conrad's radio snapped with Leland Cross's voice. "Vail, what's the issue with lane 3? Conrad kept his eyes on the trailer. Possible live animal or person inside refrigerated cargo. Silence. Then Leland exhaled, just enough static catching on the breath. "Based on what?" "Audio from the rear of the trailer during reefer cycle pause. Driver behavior inconsistent. Temperature discrepancy. Weight distribution slightly off." "That is thin." "It is enough for secondary inspection." "It is enough to ask a few questions and move freight along. We are not turning a federal station into a guessing booth." Conrad looked at the falling snow. It drifted past the yellow lights like ash from some bright, holy fire. "I'm moving the vehicle to secondary," he said. "Vail." Conrad heard the warning in his name. Leland continued, "Lower now. Do not turn a personal instinct into a transportation delay. North Line has priority routing tonight." Priority routing. There it was. A phrase too smooth for the hour. Conrad's hand rose unconsciously to the silver military chain beneath his shirt. He pressed 2 fingers against it, feeling the cold metal through cotton. Personal instinct. He knew what men like Leland meant when they said that. They meant memory. They meant damage. They meant the part of Conrad that still counted doors and mirrors and exits. They meant his old wounds had made him unreliable. Perhaps they had. But sometimes a wound was just another kind of ear. The refrigeration unit cut again. This time the silence lasted longer. From inside the trailer came a soft thud, then a scrape, then the faintest sound Conrad had ever hated hearing, a living throat trying and failing to make a full cry. Marta's voice came over the radio, tight and clear. "I heard it." Conrad did not answer at once. Across the lane, Casey lowered his head in the cab. Not denial, not confusion. Recognition. Conrad lifted the radio. "Vehicle is being held for secondary inspection. I'm requesting Nebraska State Patrol Commercial Enforcement on site." Leland's voice sharpened. "You are exceeding—" "No," Conrad said. "I'm documenting." He switched channels and placed the call. Trooper Hal Rusk answered with the weary irritation of a man dragged from warm coffee into winter law. "Commercial enforcement. This is Conrad Vail at the I-80 Federal Way Station. I have a refrigerated container with intact seal, temperature discrepancy, irregular rear weight distribution, and audible indications of a live animal or person inside. Requesting witness and authority for emergency inspection." Hal was quiet for half a beat. Then he said, "You sure about what you heard?" Conrad looked at the silver trailer. Under the station lights, the metal looked almost beautiful. A clean white beast wearing a blue company name, waiting patiently in the snow. "No," Conrad said. "I'm sure it was alive." That was all. Hal told him to hold the vehicle and not break the seal until he arrived. Conrad thanked him, then walked back into the lane. He directed Casey to pull forward into the secondary inspection bay. The truck moved slowly, tires hissing over the wet concrete, trailer lights glowing red through the snowfall. Casey kept both hands on the wheel. His head remained bowed slightly, as though the weight behind him had finally moved from the trailer into his chest. Marta stepped out of the office with a clipboard tucked under her arm and her red thermos in one hand. She had thrown a reflective vest over her thick cardigan, making her look, as she often joked, like a county fair warning sign. "You know," she said, stopping beside Conrad, "when I said January needed miracles, I was thinking more along the lines of decent pie." Conrad did not smile, but something near his eyes eased. "Still early." Marta looked toward the trailer. Her expression softened. "You really heard something in there?" "Yes." "Animal?" "I think so." She nodded once. "No drama, no questions about his nerves, his sleep, his past." Marta gave people the mercy of believing what they had earned. The truck came to a stop in the secondary lane. Snow kept falling. Not heavily now, but steadily, bright under the station lights, softening every hard edge except the one inside Conrad's chest. He walked to the rear of the container and stood beside the sealed doors. Casey remained in the cab, face shadowed behind the windshield. Marta watched from a few steps away, clipboard pressed to her coat. Somewhere down the interstate, a siren gave one brief cry and faded, still far off. Trooper Hal Rusk was on his way. Conrad placed his palm against the cold metal of the trailer. The vibration of the refrigeration unit passed through his glove and into his bones. He leaned closer, not enough to touch the seal, not enough to break the law, only enough to listen. For a moment, there was nothing, Then, from behind the steel, behind the paperwork, behind the clean company logo, and the perfect manifest, came one weak scratch. Conrad closed his eyes. The world had many kinds of doors. Some guarded homes, some guarded secrets, some guarded the small, trembling border between life and silence. He opened his eyes again and kept his hand on the metal. "Hold on," he whispered, so quietly only the snow could have heard him. The trailer stood beneath the lights, silent and sealed, while the winter night gathered around it like a buried truth waiting for the first honest witness. Trooper Hal Rusk arrived with snow on the hood of his patrol vehicle and irritation written across his face like an old road sign. His cruiser rolled into the way station with one brief flash of blue light, not enough to make a scene, only enough to tell the winter night that the law had arrived and did not appreciate being summoned from a warm cup of coffee. Hal stepped out slowly, boots landing in the slush, shoulders hunched against the cold. He was a sturdy man of 48 with a clipped mustache, thinning dark blonde hair under his hat, and the expression of someone who had spent half his life listening to drivers explain why the rules should not apply to them. Conrad Vail met him beside the secondary inspection lane. The refrigerated trailer stood under the station lights, long and silent except for the mechanical growl of its cooling unit. Snow settled across its roof in a thin white veil. The Northline Meridian Freight logo looked almost clean enough to be holy. Hal glanced from the trailer to Conrad's body camera. "You always call State Patrol for a noisy refrigerator?" he asked. Conrad did not rise to it. "Only when the refrigerator sounds alive." Hal's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with professional doubt. He had known men like Conrad before, veterans who heard things other people missed. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes the past had left a radio running in their heads, catching signals that were no longer there. Marta Bell came out of the office with her clipboard tucked under one arm and her red thermos in the other hand. Her reflective vest hung over her thick cardigan like a warning sign trying to attend a church supper. "I heard it too," she said. Hal looked at her. "You heard what exactly?" "A scrape, then a whine." Marta took a sip from the thermos. "And before you ask, no, my coffee doesn't make noises like that unless it's been sitting since Tuesday." Hal grunted. It might have been the beginning of a laugh in a more generous climate. Casey Dunmore remained in the cab of the truck, both hands on the wheel. His face was pale behind the glass. He had stopped pretending to be annoyed. Fear had a way of removing costumes. Hal walked to the rear of the trailer and examined the seal without touching it. He read the number aloud. Conrad checked it against the manifest. Marta wrote it down. Everything matched. On paper, the trailer was obedient. That was the problem. Hal moved toward the reefer display, mounted near the front of the container. He took out a small flashlight and angled the beam over the numbers. 31 degrees, he said. "Manifest says 36, Conrad replied. Hal looked over the cargo classification. Packaged temperature-controlled food products, not deep freeze. Correct. Could still fluctuate. It could. Hal looked back at him. You're not making this easy. No? The trooper gave him a long look, then turned to the cab. Driver? Casey rolled the window down. Hal approached, his notebook already open. You loaded this freight? No, sir. You witnessed loading? No, sir. Trailer was sealed at pickup. Who gave you the route? Dispatch. Name? Casey hesitated. Conrad watched the young man's thumb move to the steel ring on his finger. Around once. Around again. Grady Osmond, Casey said. Hal wrote the name down. You aware of any live cargo? No. The word left Casey too fast. Hal did not accuse him. He just let the silence do what silence did best. It expanded until Casey had to live inside it. The refrigeration unit shuddered, coughed, and then stopped. The way station changed shape in the quiet. Without the machine noise, the night became enormous. Snow brushed the pavement. Somewhere far beyond the lights, a truck downshifted on the interstate. Marta's pen paused above the clipboard. Then it came again, a faint scratch, metal against metal, weak, irregular, unmistakably deliberate. No one moved. After the scratch came a small sound that was not a pallet, not a strap, not settling cargo. It was low, strained, and brief, as if whatever made it had spent all its strength on asking the world to notice. Hal's face changed, not dramatically. He was not that kind of man, but the irritation went out of his eyes, and something older than procedure took its place. "All right," he said quietly. Casey lowered his head in the cab. Hal shut his notebook. "We're opening it!" Leland Cross's voice burst through Conrad's radio almost at once, sharp with contained panic. "No one is breaking that seal without station authorization." Hal turned his head slightly toward Conrad's radio. "This is Trooper Rusk. Seal will be opened under emergency inspection based on audible indication of a live animal or person inside a temperature-controlled container. Body cam and station cameras are active. I'll sign the witness line." A pause. Leland's voice returned lower. "Trooper, that freight is under priority routing." Hal looked at the trailer as though it had personally insulted him. "Then it can be priority inspected." Marta's mouth twitched. Conrad felt something inside his chest loosen by the width of a thread. Not relief, not yet. Only the small mercy of not being alone with what he had heard. They moved carefully. Hal dictated the seal number. Marta repeated it for the station camera. Conrad stood where his body cam could capture the latch, the seal, the doors, Casey in the cab, and the trooper's hands. No one hurried. That mattered. A hasty man could be dismissed as emotional. A careful one left footprints in stone. Hal cut the seal. The small metal snap sounded louder than it should have. For a second, nothing happened. Then Hal lifted the locking bar. The rear doors opened with a frozen groan. Cold vapor spilled out and rolled around their boots in white folds. The smell came with it. Chilled cardboard, diesel, plastic wrap, and something faintly sour beneath it all. Not decay. Not enough time for that. More like fear trapped in a place never meant to hold breath. Rows of packaged food products faced them, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. Too neatly. Hal shone his flashlight across the load. "Looks full," he said. Conrad stepped closer but did not enter. "Rear weight bias, slight temperature mismatch. Sound came from the back half." Marta leaned to one side, squinting past the first row. "Those front pallets have product labels. Back row doesn't." Hal's flashlight returned to the deeper shadows. She was right. The first rows were real freight, wrapped and labeled. Behind them stood another wall of pallets, stacked to create the impression of a full load. But the boxes on that wall were blank, lighter, and arranged in a way no tired warehouse crew would bother arranging unless they wanted to hide geometry itself. Hal muttered something under his breath that might have been a prayer or an insult. Conrad climbed carefully into the container. The cold hit his face like a flat hand. His breath clouded instantly. The floor vibrated faintly beneath his boots. He moved between the pallets, shoulders brushing plastic wrap, every sound sharpened by the metal walls. He did not think of old places. He refused to. But memory did not always ask permission. For one heartbeat, the container became a corridor somewhere far away, narrow and breathless, where every step had once mattered. Conrad closed his fingers around the silver chain under his shirt until the present returned. Nebraska, snow, Marta's pen scratching, Hal's flashlight behind him. He reached the false pallet wall. The boxes were not heavy. He shifted one, then another. Hal climbed in behind him and helped, less skeptical now, more grim. The wall came apart piece by piece, revealing the dark space behind it. A shape moved. Marta, still outside, whispered, "Dear Lord." Behind the false wall, near the rear corner of the trailer, sat a low metal cage. Inside was a German shepherd. For a moment the dog seemed made of shadow and frost. Its coat was not the dark gray Conrad had first imagined through the metal, but a black and gold pattern dulled by cold and exhaustion. A dark saddle covered its back like a torn cloak. The chest and legs held a warmer gold beneath the grime, and along the ridge of its spine, a pale streak of fur caught the flashlight, silvered by frost. The dog was male, large-framed but thin from hardship. Its ears should have stood high, one lifted halfway, the other trembled before rising. The left ear had a small nick along the edge. On its forehead, partly hidden by shadow, a faint, lightning-shaped streak of pale gold ran down toward the bridge of the nose. The dog did not bark. That was what struck Conrad hardest. It did not lunge at the door of the cage. It did not bare its teeth. It only lifted its head with terrible effort and looked at him. The eyes were amber, darkened by fatigue, but steady. A guard at a fallen gate. A soldier after the horn had stopped sounding. A creature that had every reason to expect nothing from men and still had not fully turned away. Hal swore softly, not in anger at the dog, but at the world that had put it there. Marta climbed one step into the trailer, then stopped, one hand over her mouth. Casey called from outside, voice cracking. "I didn't know it was like that." No one answered him. Conrad crouched near the cage, slow enough not to crowd the dog. The animal watched every inch of movement. Its body shivered in waves, not dramatic, not theatrical, just the hard arithmetic of cold, taking more than the body could spare. "Hey," Conrad said softly. The dog's eyes moved to his face. Conrad removed one glove. Hal caught the motion. "Careful?" "I know." He did know. A frightened dog could do damage. A trapped dog had the right to. Conrad would not have blamed him. He held out the back of his hand near the bars, not through them, not demanding contact, only offering the idea of it. The dog stared. Its nostrils moved once, twice. Then, with a slowness that seemed to cost more than strength, the German shepherd lowered its muzzle and touched Conrad's knuckles through the bars. Not a bite, not even a warning, a touch. Then the dog rested there, the weight of its muzzle light as a final question. Conrad forgot the cold for one full second. He had known alarms, orders, engines, radios, locks, the click of metal, the thunder of memory waking him at 3 a.m. He knew how a man could train himself to trust nothing except what he controlled. He did not know what to do with this. A living creature had been locked in darkness, chilled, hidden, reduced to a number behind blank boxes. And still, when a hand came close, it had chosen not hatred, not panic, but the smallest possible act of trust. Something inside Conrad lowered its weapon. Marta moved first. "I've got emergency blankets," she said, voice rough. "In the office. And towels. Maybe that old fleece Leland thinks is too ugly for public view." Hal nodded. "Get 'em." She climbed down fast, almost slipping once, then caught herself and muttered at the pavement as though it had planned the attack. Hal radioed for animal assistance and medical support, giving location and condition in clipped official phrases. The words were necessary, but they sounded too small for the moment. Conrad stayed by the cage. The dog kept its muzzle near his hand. "What's on the collar?" Hal asked. Conrad shifted the flashlight. Around the dog's neck was an old leather collar, dark brown, stiff with cold. It was not decorative, not new, not the kind of collar a family bought for a beloved pet. A small metal plate was fixed to it, scratched but readable beneath the frost. Conrad wiped it gently with his thumb. Arm 17, Lot 406C. Hal leaned closer. "That a name?" "No." "Owner number?" Conrad looked at the dog. The dog looked back. "No," Conrad said. "That's inventory." The word tasted wrong. Casey had climbed down from the cab and stood near the open doors, arms wrapped around himself. He looked at the cage, then away, then back again as if each glance hurt, but not looking hurt more. "They said it was special freight," he whispered. Hal turned on him. "Who said?" "Grady." Casey's voice was thin. "Grady Osmond, dispatch. He said not to open anything. Said if I heard sounds, it was load shift. Said refrigerated trailers make all kinds of noises." "And you believed that?" Hal asked. Casey's face crumpled without tears. "I wanted to." That answer stopped Conrad more than a better lie would have. Wanting to believe was one of the oldest doors through which wrong entered the world. Marta returned with a silver thermal blanket, 2 towels, and a fleece patterned with faded snowmen wearing sunglasses. Under other circumstances, Conrad might have judged the snowmen harshly. Under these, they looked like saints of a very strange church. "Ugly fleece reporting for duty," Marta said, breathing hard. The dog's eyes shifted to her, cautious but not wild. "Easy, handsome," she murmured. "Nobody's asking you to like the blanket. Frankly, I don't like it either." Conrad looked at the cage latch. It was secured with a simple lock. Hal documented it on camera before cutting it. Conrad kept his body low and his movements slow. When the door opened, the dog did not rush out. It tried to stand, failed once, then braced its front paws and managed to lift its chest. Conrad felt anger move through him, quiet and clean. Not the hot kind, not the kind that made men stupid. This was older, steadier, the kind that could wait, write down names, follow procedures, and still not forgive. "Come on," he whispered. "One step." The German shepherd looked at him, then at the open door, then at the white vapor drifting behind Conrad, like winter itself had come to witness. It placed one paw outside the cage, then the other. Its legs shook. Conrad did not grab him. He let the dog choose the distance, the pace, the dignity. When the shepherd leaned forward, Conrad slid the towel beneath its chest and supported just enough. Marta spread the thermal blanket. Hal stepped aside, clearing the path. Together, they eased the dog out of the cage and onto the blanket near the open trailer doors, where the air was still cold, but no longer imprisoned. The dog folded down slowly, muzzle lowering to Conrad's wrist. Marta's face softened. "He needs a name." Hal looked at the collar. "RM doesn't count." "No," Conrad said. The dog's back rose and fell under the blanket. The pale line along his spine showed through the dark fur, like a snow-covered ridge running across a black mountain. "Ridge," Conrad said. Marta glanced at him. "Because of the fur? Because he held?" The words came before Conrad could polish them. He did not explain further. Marta did not ask. Outside, the snow kept falling under the station lights, making the concrete glow as if the whole place had been lifted into some quiet, northern myth. The trailer, which had looked so clean from the road, now stood open and exposed. The false pallet wall leaned in pieces. The cage sat empty. Hal walked back to Casey with his notebook. Conrad stayed with Ridge. The dog's eyes were half closed now, but when Conrad shifted, they opened. Not wide, just enough to make sure he had not left. "I'm here," Conrad said. Ridge's breathing was shallow but steady. A heated service vehicle was brought around, its interior warm enough to fog the windows. Marta climbed in first with the blankets. Hal arranged transport to Dr. Lorna Keene's clinic, the nearest veterinarian willing to answer calls at any hour and argue with anyone who suggested waiting until morning. Conrad lifted Ridge with Hal's help, supporting the dog's chest and hips, careful not to press too hard. Ridge made one low sound, not quite a whine, not quite a protest. His head turned toward Conrad's collar, toward the silver chain beneath his shirt, as if the faint clink of metal had meaning. Conrad froze. Then Ridge settled, exhausted, muzzle resting against Conrad's sleeve. In the service vehicle, Marta tucked the ugly snowman fleece around him with the solemnity of a queen laying a cloak over a wounded knight. "There," she said, "ridiculous, but warm." Hal shut the rear door gently. Through the fogged glass, Ridge's amber eyes remained on Conrad. Casey sat on the curb near his truck now, watched by Hal, his shoulders bowed. He looked less like a criminal mastermind than a man who had discovered the shape of his own cowardice and found it heavier than freight. Conrad stood between the open container and the warming vehicle. The wind moved through the inspection lane, carrying the smell of diesel, cold metal, and snow. Above him, Marta's leftover holiday lights blinked from the office window, stubborn little stars refusing to admit their season had ended. For years, Conrad had believed his vigilance was only a leftover curse, a habit from a life that would not release him. He had hated the way he heard too much, noticed too much, trusted too little. Tonight, that curse had heard a scratch behind steel. Tonight, a door had opened because he could not pretend the sound was only weather. The service vehicle pulled away slowly toward Dr. Lorna Keene's clinic, its taillights red in the white night. Conrad watched it go until the snow swallowed the shape. Then he turned back to the container. The false wall was still there in pieces. The paperwork was still clipped to Marta's board. The seal lay broken in a small bright curl on the wet pavement. This was not a loading error, not a bad driver, not a misplaced animal. Someone had built a wall to make a living creature disappear. And for the first time that night, Conrad understood that Ridge had not simply been found behind freight. He had been counted as freight. The thought settled over him colder than the snow and far heavier. Dr. Lorna Keene's clinic sat at the edge of town beneath a row of cottonwoods glazed white with snow. By daylight, it would have looked modest, a low brick building with a faded sign, a ramp salted against the ice, and a line of paw prints painted along the front window for children to smile at as they passed. But at 2 a.m, with snow softening the road and the moon hidden behind cloud, the little clinic looked like the last warm room in all Nebraska. Conrad Vail rode in the back of the service vehicle beside Ridge, one hand braced against the wall, the other resting close to the German shepherd without touching him unless the dog asked for it. Ridge lay wrapped in Marta Bell's silver thermal blanket and the ridiculous fleece with snowmen and sunglasses. The dog's eyes opened whenever the vehicle hit a rough patch. Each time, Conrad lowered his voice and said, "Still here." It was not a promise he had planned to make. It simply kept coming out of him. Marta sat in the front passenger seat, holding her red thermos like a sacred vessel. She had brought a cardboard box from the way station office, too, filled with copies of the manifest, printed timestamps, and the broken seal secured in a plastic evidence bag. Hal Rusk followed behind in his patrol vehicle with Casey Dunmore, who had been placed under watch rather than under drama. The young driver had not tried to run. He had only gone quiet, and somehow the quiet looked worse on him than panic. When they reached the clinic, the front door opened before Conrad could knock. Lorna Keene stood in the doorway, wearing pale green scrubs under a gray cardigan, her hair tied low, her face calm in the way only certain animal doctors could be calm at impossible hours. She was in her mid-40s, slender but strong through the shoulders, with alert brown eyes and hands that looked gentle until work demanded otherwise. She did not ask for the whole story first. She looked at Ridge. Then she said, "Bring him in slowly." Inside, the clinic held warmth like a small chapel. There was the clean sting of antiseptic, the deeper comfort of coffee, and from somewhere near the reception desk, the smell of apple pie Marta had apparently produced from her tote bag as if she were a winter magician. A rack beside the exam room held knitted dog sweaters and folded towels. A little artificial pine tree still stood by the counter, decorated with biscuit-shaped ornaments. In any other hour, Conrad might have found it sentimental. Tonight, it looked like defiance. Ridge had come out of a steel container into a room where someone had hung tiny scarves for creatures who did not understand Christmas, but understood cold. Lorna guided them into the exam room. On the blanket, don't lift higher than you need to. Conrad and Hal eased Ridge onto the padded table. Ridge tried to raise his head when Hal stepped near the door, then turned his muzzle toward Conrad, as if taking inventory of where every person stood. "Easy," Lorna murmured. "Nobody's taking your post." That was when Conrad noticed it. Even half-frozen, exhausted, and weak, Ridge had angled his body between Conrad and the exam room door. Not fully, not dramatically. His strength was too thin for grand gestures. But the intent was there. Lorna saw it too. Her gaze flicked from the dog to Conrad. "He's not feral," she said. "No? He knows placement." Conrad did not answer. Lorna worked quickly, but without hurry. She checked Ridge's temperature, gums, hydration, paws, eyes, heartbeat. She spoke to the dog before every touch, not in a babying voice, but in the low, respectful tone of someone entering another creature's house. Ridge endured it. When she lifted one paw, his muscles tightened. When the latch on a metal cabinet clicked behind them, his head snapped toward the sound. His ears rose. His body tried to follow, failed, and trembled with the effort. Conrad stepped into his line of sight. Ridge's breathing slowed. Lorna watched that too. "Mild hypothermia," she said after a while. "Dehydrated, exhausted. No sign that he's beyond recovery, but he's been under stress for a while." Marta let out a breath she had been storing since the container opened. "So he'll live?" Lorna did not make false blessings. "If his body keeps responding, he has a good chance." Marta nodded once, then looked at Ridge. "Hear that, handsome? You're officially too stubborn to quit." Ridge blinked slowly. Hal stood near the wall with his hat in both hands, looking uncomfortable in the way men often did when tenderness entered a room without asking their permission. His notebook was open, but he had stopped writing. Lorna reached for the old leather collar. Ridge stiffened. Conrad leaned closer. "Easy, Ridge." At the name, the dog's eyes shifted. A small thing, but not nothing. Lorna paused. "That what you're calling him?" "For now." "For now" is how most names become permanent. Marta smiled faintly. "That is how I got a cat named Receipt." Hal looked at her. She shrugged. "Long story. Terrible cat." For the first time since the secondary lane, the room breathed something almost like humor. Lorna examined the collar without removing it fully. The leather was old, practical, darkened by years of weather and handling. The metal plate had been wiped clean once already, but frost had gathered again at the edges. RM-17, Lot 406C. Lorna's expression changed. Not surprise exactly. Recognition with a shadow behind it. Conrad noticed. "You know it." "I know the style." She took a small light from her pocket and angled it across the plate. RM could stand for a lot of things, but this format, letters, dash, 2 digits, then lot reference, looks like an evaluation code, not a household tag. "Evaluation for what?" Hal asked. "Working dogs. Dogs assessed for law enforcement, security, search work, protection placement. Sometimes military-adjacent programs, sometimes private contractors." Lorna's mouth tightened. "Some dogs wash out because they're too soft, some because they're too old, some because they're too independent to be convenient." Marta looked offended on Ridge's behalf. "Independent sounds like a compliment." "It usually is," Lorna said, "just not to people who prefer obedience over judgment." Conrad's eyes stayed on the code. RM-17, Lot 406C, a dog without a name, given a number clean enough to fit in a spreadsheet? Lorna walked to the clinic computer and typed with the careful impatience of someone trying not to hope too loudly. There was a place called Red Mesa K9 Evaluation, based out of New Mexico originally, but they worked with regional transfer networks. Dogs assessed, redirected, adopted out, sometimes placed in civil protection work. Still active? Conrad asked. Not the way it was. Her fingers paused. A few years back, records got messy. Transfers through private transport firms, missing adoption confirmations, dogs listed as moved but never received. Hal's notebook lifted again. Lorna looked over her shoulder. I'm not saying that's what happened here. No, Hal said. You're saying we should write it down. Exactly. Conrad felt the room tilt by a degree, not because one abused system surprised him. Systems failed all the time. Men failed more often. But the cold precision of it unsettled him. A living dog wrapped in a snowman fleece on an exam table, connected by an old code to paperwork that had been quietly losing animals for years. Evil, Conrad thought, did not always wear a wolf's head. Sometimes it wore a lanyard and printed clean labels. Marta set her coffee down. I can pull station records. Lorna looked at her. At this hour? Marta snorted. Sweetheart, I work night shift. This is my afternoon. They moved into the small office behind reception while Ridge rested under warming blankets. Lorna left the exam room door open. Conrad remained just inside it, visible to Ridge, while Marta used the clinic's spare desk to log into the station archive through secure access. Hal stood behind her, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to witness. Lorna made fresh coffee that looked strong enough to make the dead reconsider their schedule. The computer screen filled with rows of vehicle logs. Northline Meridian Freight. The name appeared once, then again, then again. Not every night, not even every week, but often enough to become a pattern once someone stopped looking at the trips as separate events. Marta filtered by refrigerated trailer classification. Same temperature band, she said. Controlled food products, mostly late-night routing. Look here, inspection time under 4 minutes. Again, again, again. Hal frowned. That's fast. It's not illegal to be fast, Marta said. No, Conrad said. But it's useful. Marta's fingers moved. Rear weight variance shows up twice before, marked as minor. Cleared. By who? Hal asked. Marta hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough to make Conrad look at the screen. Night supervisor override, she said. Leland Cross. No one spoke his name aloud immediately. It sat in the office between them like a cup no one wanted to drink from. From the exam room came a faint sound. Conrad turned sharply. Ridge had lifted his head. Not much, but enough. His amber eyes were fixed on the hallway, on Conrad, on the door beyond Conrad. He was too weak to stand, yet his front paw had slid toward the edge of the blanket as if he meant to come anyway. Conrad stepped back into the room. Ridge lowered his head again only after Conrad returned. Lorna followed and leaned against the doorframe. That dog has decided you're his assignment. Conrad looked at Ridge. He chose poorly. Most loyal creatures do, Marta called from the office. It's their tragic flaw. Hal made a sound that might have been agreement. Lorna bent to adjust the warming blanket. No, I don't think he chose poorly. I think he recognized someone who listens for small sounds. That landed harder than Conrad expected. For years, people had treated his alertness like a symptom first and a skill second. Sometimes it was. He knew that. He was not romantic about the broken machinery inside himself. But tonight, the thing that kept him awake had kept Ridge alive long enough to be wrapped in ugly fleece under warm lights. Conrad touched the silver chain beneath his shirt. For once, it did not feel like an anchor pulling him backward. It felt like a bell rung in the snow. Hal's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked toward the front. Casey's ready to talk more. They found Casey in the waiting room, seated beneath a poster about heartworm prevention, hands between his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller under fluorescent light. Younger, too. His Northline jacket lay folded beside him as if he no longer wanted the logo touching his skin. Hal stood near the counter. Conrad stayed by the doorway. Marta kept the office computer open. Casey did not look up at first. "I didn't know there was a dog." No one interrupted. "I knew it wasn't normal," he said. "But I didn't know. Not like that." Hal's voice was level. "Tell us what you did know." Casey rubbed the steel ring on his finger. "This was my third special route. First two, I heard something once, maybe. I told dispatch the reefer sounded off. Grady said they all do that. Said I was new, said if I wanted steady work, I had to stop inventing problems." "Grady Osmond?" Hal asked. Casey nodded. Conrad watched his hands. The ring turned slower now. "He text you?" Hal asked. "Sometimes. Different phone." Casey swallowed. "He said not to answer questions outside the manifest. If inspection asked about noises, say pallet shift." Marta's face had gone still. Casey finally looked up. His eyes found Conrad, then fell away. "He said something else." Conrad waited. "He said, 'Don't listen to freight. Freight doesn't have a soul.'" The room seemed to lose temperature, not because the sentence was loud, because it was polished. A man had said it before, maybe more than once, maybe often enough that it had become a private commandment, a little piece of language designed to make mercy feel foolish. Conrad looked through the open exam room door. Ridge slept under the warming blanket, one paw visible, claws relaxed now against the towel. Freight, no soul. The words had no place in that room. Lorna turned away first, jaw tight. Hal wrote the quote down exactly. Marta's fingers hovered above the keyboard as if she wanted to type something that would get her fired. Conrad spoke softly. "Did Grady tell you where this route ended?" "Distribution handoff near Omaha," Casey said. "That's what the manifest says." "What did Grady say?" Casey closed his eyes. "He said I'd get exact drop instructions after I cleared the scale." Hal looked up. Marta whispered, "So the manifest was a costume." Conrad did not like how well that fit. Lorna returned to the computer and opened another contact. "I'm calling Nadine Keller." "Who?" Hal asked. "USDA Adjacent Transport Compliance Consultant. She's worked animal movement and health certificate cases for years. If these papers are stitched together, she'll see the thread." It took Lorna 2 calls to reach her. Nadine Keller's voice came through the clinic speaker 15 minutes later, calm, clipped, and awake in a way that suggested sleep had never been allowed to make demands on her. Lorna sent images of the collar code, manifest, seal number, temperature log, and Casey's route documents. The waiting began. Marta cut apple pie into uneven slices during it, because, in her words, bureaucracy is best endured with butter. Conrad did not eat. He stood near the exam room door, watching Ridge breathe. At last, the clinic phone rang. Lorna answered on speaker. Nadine Keller did not waste greetings. "This is not a clean food shipment." Hal leaned closer. "Based on?" "Temperature range is compatible with controlled food, yes, but the certificate references a facility code that was deactivated 19 months ago. Signature block is reused. The routing language is generic. Too generic, and the RM17 collar code resembles Red Mesa K9 evaluation inventory, not cargo labeling." Conrad closed his eyes for 1 second. Lorna asked, "Could it be one illegal transport?" "It could," Nadine said. "But the lot designation suggests grouping. The manifest appears built around legitimate cargo to hide an off-record transfer." Marta muttered, "Like sewing a rotten patch inside a clean coat." "Exactly," Nadine said, as if Marta had used the technical term. Hal's face hardened. "What do you recommend?" "Preserve all records. Do not let the driver or company reclaim the animal. Do not release the trailer until higher review signs off. I'll start checking related certificates." Lorna thanked her and ended the call. The clinic fell quiet. Outside the window, dawn had not yet arrived, but the snow had brightened. It lay over the parking lot, the ramp, the cottonwoods, and the road beyond, giving the world a clean face it had not earned. Ridge stirred. Conrad stepped into the exam room. The German shepherd's eyes opened, heavy but aware. He tried to shift, failed, then settled with a breath that fogged faintly in the warm air. The metal cabinet behind Conrad clicked as Lorna shut it. Ridge flinched, not violently, just enough. Then, with effort that made Conrad's throat tighten, the dog slid one paw forward and placed it on Conrad's boot. A weak paw. A deliberate paw. Conrad looked down. He had been standing near the exam room door without realizing what he was doing. His hand had moved to the lock. Once, twice. His fingers were ready for the third check. Ridge's paw rested on the leather of his boot as if to stop him, or join him. Conrad stood very still. The old part of him said, "Check again." The tired part said, "You have to." The living creature at his feet said nothing at all. It only kept its paw there. Conrad let his hand fall from the lock. For the first time in many years, he did not feel safer because a door had been checked. He felt steadier because someone else was watching it too. Marta appeared quietly in the hallway with her clipboard held against her chest. She saw the paw on Conrad's boot and by some rare mercy did not make a joke. Lorna lowered the lights in the exam room. Hal stepped outside to make another call. Casey sat in the waiting room, staring at his own hands as if trying to understand what they had carried. Conrad remained beside Ridge until the dog's eyes drifted closed again. The old leather collar still circled Ridge's neck, its cold metal plate marked with a code that had tried to replace a name. RM-17. Lot 406C. But under the warm clinic lights, beneath snowman fleece and careful hands, the code had begun to fail. Because Conrad had said Ridge, and the dog had looked back. By morning, the snow had made every lie look clean. It lay across the roofs of parked trucks, over the clinic ramp, along the cottonwood branches outside Dr. Lorna Keene's window, and in soft white folds beside the highway. Nebraska had put on its innocent face again, as if no refrigerated trailer had opened in the night, as if no German shepherd had been found behind a wall of false pallets with a number where a name should have been. Inside the clinic, the world was less innocent. Coffee had gone cold in 3 different cups. Marta Bell's red thermos sat beside a stack of printed way station logs. Trooper Hal Rusk had left before dawn to file his report and secure Casey Dunmore's statement through the proper channels. Casey himself had been taken to a warmer, quieter room at the station, watched but not mistreated, a man not yet forgiven and not yet condemned. Conrad Vail remained at the clinic. He told himself it was because Ridge still woke whenever a cabinet latch clicked. That was true. It was not the whole truth. Ridge slept in the exam room beneath warming blankets, his black and gold coat dulled by exhaustion, but beginning to show its true color in the soft light. The pale mark down his forehead looked clearer now, a thin, crooked streak like lightning that had lost its thunder but not its shape. His old collar had been removed for cleaning and documentation, then placed in a clear evidence bag on Lorna's desk. RM-17, Chak Lot 406C, a name made by men who did not want to use names. Conrad stood near the hallway, arms folded, watching the dog breathe. Lorna passed him with a clipboard. "You know staring won't speed up recovery." "I know. You planning to do it anyway?" "Yes," she nodded. "Good. He likes predictable foolishness." Lorna had slept perhaps 20 minutes in her office chair. It showed only in the faint shadows under her eyes. Some people became softer with exhaustion. Lorna became more precise. She moved through the clinic, tying loose ends. Fluids, notes, calls, photographs, records. Every small act seemed to tell Ridge the same thing. The world had failed you once. This room will not. In the reception area, Marta was already deep in the way station archives. She had taken over a corner desk with the authority of a woman who had once explained payroll codes to men twice her salary and half her cents. Her cardigan sleeves were pushed to her elbows. Her red hair clip sat crooked. The screen reflected rows of data across her glasses. "I found Northline again," she called. Conrad left the doorway but kept Ridge in view. Marta tapped the screen. Same refrigerated classification, same late-night window, same clean paperwork. They don't come through every week. That would be too easy. But look at the pattern over 2 years. Lorna leaned in. The logs showed what one trip had hidden. A single truck could be an accident. 2 could be coincidence. But the repeated entries made a rhythm, and rhythm was where truth often hid. Northline Meridian Freight, controlled food products, night routing, short inspection times, minor variances cleared. Supervisor notes brief enough to mean nothing and frequent enough to mean something. Marta scrolled. They never stay long. 3 minutes, 4, sometimes less. A few flagged for temperature variance, all cleared. Rear weight imbalance twice, marked non-actionable. Conrad studied the entries. Who cleared them? Marta did not answer immediately. Lorna looked up from the screen. Marta! Night supervisor override, Marta said. Not every time. Enough times. They all knew what name belonged there. Leland Cross. The name did not need to be spoken to darken the room. Lorna folded her arms. Could be laziness. Marta made a sound. Laziness leaves crumbs. This looks swept. Conrad said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He knew systems, not just military systems, though those had their own sacred absurdities. All systems learn to protect themselves. A form went missing because it embarrassed a supervisor. A call was not logged because the hour was inconvenient. A sound was ignored because paperwork said silence was more profitable. Marta opened another folder. There are also calls logged as informal dispatch confirmations. No full transcript, just routing notes. Same contact code appears beside several Northline entries. Grady Osmond? Conrad asked. Marta looked at him. You guessed that too fast. I listened to Casey. You listened correctly. She highlighted the code. Several entries expanded. Grady's name appeared not as driver, not as owner, not as anyone who touched cargo. He existed in the safer places. Dispatch confirmations, route adjustments, after-hours instructions. A man of schedules. A man who could move living things without ever seeing their eyes. Lorna's hand went still on the edge of the desk. Conrad noticed. What is it? The veterinarian did not answer at once. Her gaze had gone somewhere beyond the clinic walls, beyond the snow-covered town, into a memory that had waited quietly until a name woke it. Osmond, she said. Marta turned from the screen. You know him? No, Lorna's voice was careful, but I knew a man connected to that name. She walked to a gray filing cabinet behind the front counter. It was old, dented at the bottom, the kind of cabinet that had survived renovations by being too stubborn to throw out. She unlocked the second drawer and began searching through paper files. Conrad watched her pull a folder with a faded green tab. 2 years ago, Lorna said, a trainer named Raylan Voss came through here with 3 dogs from a working dog evaluation transfer. 2 shepherds and a Dutch mix. All older, all supposed to be moved into adoption or civil placement. She opened the file. Inside were printed records, vaccination notes, photographs, and a copy of an intake form. In the corner of one photo stood a tall, lean man in a brown training jacket, gray hair cut short, one hand resting on the head of a sable shepherd. Raylan Voss did not look like a man who smiled easily, but the dog in the photograph leaned against him like a creature that knew exactly where home stood. Raylan was strict, Lorna said. He could make a grown kennel tech feel like a criminal for leaving a water bowl too close to a heater. But he never raised his voice at a dog that didn't understand. He had a way of making commands sound like shelter. Marta's face softened. That's a rare trick. He brought biscuits in his coat pocket and pretended he didn't. Lorna almost smiled. The dogs knew, naturally. Conrad looked at the picture. There were men who wore kindness loudly, like a medal. Raylan Voss, even in a photograph, seemed to wear his differently, hidden in the hand on a dog's head, in the attention of his stance, in the space he gave the animal beside him. "What happened to him?" Conrad asked. The almost smile faded. "He disappeared." The clinic seemed to quiet around the word. Lorna closed the file halfway, then opened it again, as if deciding that an old silence had been allowed to live long enough. "He was worried about transfers," she said. Dogs marked for adoption, but never confirmed received. Paperwork signed, but by people he couldn't reach. Transport companies changing at the last minute. Red Mesa records that looked right until you asked where the dogs actually slept that night. Marta stopped typing. "He was going to report it?" Conrad asked. "He said he already had." Lorna touched the edge of the file. "But he didn't trust where the report landed." Conrad looked toward Ridge's exam room. The dog was still sleeping, but one ear twitched at the sound of a truck passing outside. Lorna continued. "Raylan came here late one afternoon. Snowing, like now. He had a folder under his coat and mud up to his knees. He said if anyone asked, I had examined the dogs and signed only what I had actually seen. Then he said something I didn't understand at the time." "What?" "He said, if they make them freight, they can make them vanish." Marta whispered, "Oh, Raylan." The words did not feel like pity. They felt like someone saying a name over a grave that had never been found. Conrad stepped closer to the file. "Was Grady Osmond connected to him?" Lorna nodded slowly. "I remember Raylan mentioning a cousin in dispatch work. Younger man. Good with roots." He sounded disappointed when he said it. That was the last conversation I had with him. Nadine Keller called at noon. Lorna put her on speaker, and the clinic gathered around the desk like townspeople around a well. Nadine's voice came through crisp, controlled, and edged with the energy of someone who had spent hours pulling threads from a very expensive lie. "I found certificate irregularities across 7 North Line entries," Nadine said. "Possibly more. The permit numbers are valid, but issue dates do not align with transport windows. 2 facility codes were inactive at the time of shipment. At least 3 signatures appear scanned from older forms." Marta looked grimly pleased. "So not sloppy." "No," Nadine said. "Worse? Tidy?" Conrad understood that. A sloppy lie begged to be caught. A tidy lie trusted people to be tired. Nadine continued. "I also searched Raylan Voss. He submitted a preliminary complaint involving Red Mesa K9 evaluation and North Line Meridian freight approximately 2 years ago." Lorna closed her eyes. "Preliminary?" Conrad asked. "Unfinished. It never became a full enforcement package. There are notes, attachments, and references to missing transfer confirmations. Then the file goes dormant." "Dormant by accident?" Marta asked. Nadine's pause was brief but heavy. Files do not bury themselves. People stop opening them. Conrad felt that sentence lodge somewhere beneath his ribs. People stop opening them. Doors, reports, eyes. Nadine went on. "One more thing. The final route confirmation before Raylan Voss disappeared was logged through an after-hours dispatch contact." Marta already knew. Conrad could see it in her face. Nadine said, "Grady Osmond." Outside, the wind pushed snow against the clinic window in a soft white rush. "Relationship?" Conrad asked. "Cousin," Nadine replied. "Maternal side, not immediate household, but close enough to appear in older public records. Lorna sat down slowly. The revelation did not crack the room like thunder. It entered like cold water under a door. Grady had not been some distant clerk moving unknown animals through unknown routes. He had known the man who tried to stop it. He had shared a family tree with him. Somewhere there had likely been holidays, photographs, borrowed tools, old arguments, a grandmother's table. Then the routes had changed, the money had spoken, and loyalty had been folded away like an inconvenient map. Nadine's voice softened only slightly. "This is not proof of what happened to Raylan, but it is enough to say his unfinished report is relevant." Conrad looked at the old photograph again. Raylan's hand rested on the shepherd's head. In the exam room, Ridge stirred and made a low sound in his sleep. Not fear exactly, but something close to remembering. Conrad went to him. Ridge's eyes opened. For a second, man and dog simply looked at each other. Conrad saw the old collar on the desk, the coat in plastic, the photo of Raylan, the rows of Northline entries on Marta's screen. They were all different languages, saying the same thing. Someone had tried to erase names. Raylan, Ridge, whatever dogs came before and after. Conrad rested his hand near Ridge's paw. The dog's toes flexed once, then relaxed. "You're not Freight," Conrad said quietly. Ridge watched him, solemn as a small judge. That evening, Lorna released Ridge into Conrad's temporary care under strict instructions that came with 3 pages of notes and the threat of professional wrath. "He needs warmth, hydration, soft food in small amounts, quiet, no stress, and absolutely no heroic nonsense," she said. Marta looked at Conrad. "That last one was for you." "I heard it? Did you understand it?" "Define understand." Hal, who had returned to collect supplemental records, snorted into his coffee. Lorna handed Conrad a folded blanket and a paper bag of supplies. "If he worsens, you call. If he refuses water, you call. If you decide to act like a stoic monument instead of a responsible adult, Marta calls." Marta raised her thermos. "Gladly." Conrad should have protested. He didn't. Ridge walked out of the clinic slowly, supported by a harness Lorna had fitted around his chest. Snow fell in light feathers across the parking lot. The air was cold enough to sting, but not cruel. Ridge paused at the doorway and looked back once, as if marking the clinic in whatever map dogs kept inside them. Then he stepped beside Conrad. Not behind him. Beside him. Conrad's small rented house sat a few miles outside town, where the highway noise faded into a low, distant river of sound. He had not planned on bringing a dog home. The place looked like a man had tried to make a life by purchasing the correct objects without knowing where to put them. 1 sturdy table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, boots by the door, canned soup in the cupboard, a framed Navy photograph turned face down on a shelf. Ridge entered cautiously. He sniffed the threshold, the rug, the baseboard heater, Conrad's boots, the door. Especially the door. Conrad locked it once, then again. His hand paused. Habit rose, patient and ancient. A 3rd time. Before his fingers touched the deadbolt, Ridge sat down in front of the door. The German shepherd was still weak. Sitting cost him effort. His back legs trembled slightly. But he did it with the grave dignity of an old doorman at a forgotten hotel. He looked up at Conrad, one ear angled crookedly because of the small nick along its edge. His amber eyes held no accusation, only attention. Conrad stared back. The absurdity of it arrived first. A half-recovered dog wrapped in clinic instructions was judging a former Navy SEAL for over-checking a deadbolt. A sound escaped Conrad's chest. It was not quite a laugh at first, more like something rusty breaking loose. Then it became a laugh, small, rough, almost embarrassed. Ridge tilted his head. That made it worse. Conrad leaned one shoulder against the wall and laughed again, quieter this time. one hand over his mouth, like he had been caught violating some sacred law of loneliness. It had been weeks since he had laughed, maybe longer. The house did not know what to do with the sound. It bounced once off the kitchen cabinets, brushed the turned-down photograph, and settled somewhere near the boots. "All right," Conrad said, breathing out. "Point taken." Ridge blinked. Conrad did not check the lock a third time. He made a place for Ridge beside the heater with the folded blanket from Lorna. Ridge circled once, too tired for a second circle, and lowered himself carefully. His head remained turned toward the door. Conrad sat at the kitchen table, with Marta's copied logs spread before him. He did not sleep. Not yet. Sleep still stood far away, a wary animal of its own. But the room had changed. It was not safer in any measurable way. The locks were the same, the windows were the same, the night outside held the same long Nebraska dark. Still, there was another breath in the house, another set of ears, another living thing that had known a sealed door and survived it. Near midnight, Conrad's phone buzzed. "Marta." He answered on the first ring. "I found something," she said. Her voice had lost all its humor. Conrad sat straighter. Ridge lifted his head. "Old log," Marta continued. "Night Raylan Voss disappeared. A Northline truck diverted off the listed route after clearing a rural scale checkpoint. Dispatch note says weather adjustment." Conrad looked at the snow pressing gently against the window. "Where did it go?" he asked. Marta exhaled. "Brightwater Cold Storage." The name meant nothing to Conrad yet, and still it seemed to darken the room. Marta continued, slower now. "Warehouse near a rail spur, middle of the fields, not on the manifest, not on the official route." Conrad looked down at Ridge. The German shepherd was staring at him, fully awake, as if some deep part of the dog had heard the shape of the name, even without understanding the words. Brightwater. Cold storage. Outside, snow covered the Nebraska fields in quiet white. Inside, an old route opened like a buried road beneath the ice. Morning came bright over Nebraska, but it brought no peace. The snow had stopped before sunrise, leaving the fields smooth and white beneath a pale blue sky. Every fence line looked softened. Every ditch looked forgiven. Along I-80, the trucks kept moving as if the night before had been nothing more than weather, as if a German shepherd had not been pulled from a hidden cage behind false pallets, as if a missing man's old route had not risen out of the records like a road beneath thawing ice. Conrad Vail drove back to the way station with Marta Bell's copied logs in a folder on the passenger seat. Ridge was not with him. That felt wrong. The German shepherd had been left at Conrad's house under Dr. Lorna Keene's orders, resting beside the heater with fresh water, soft food, and a blanket arranged in the exact way Lorna had insisted upon. Conrad had checked the doors twice before leaving. Ridge had watched him from the blanket, ears tired but attentive, as if keeping score. Conrad had not checked a third time. He had gotten halfway to the truck before turning back to make sure the heater was not too close. Progress, he thought, had strange manners. The station looked ordinary in daylight. Too ordinary. The inspection lanes were wet and silver. The scale office smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. Marta's leftover holiday lights still blinked in the window, stubborn against both season and common sense. Inside the office, Marta was waiting with more documents, a legal pad, and the expression of a woman who had already argued with 2 printers and won both wars. "I printed the temperature logs, Casey's preliminary statement, the Northline entries, the Brightwater diversion, and Nadine's summary," she said. "I also made 3 copies, because paper has a way of getting lonely right before it disappears." Conrad took the stack. "You sleep?" "Don't ask cruel questions before coffee." She handed him a cup. He looked toward the hallway leading to the supervisor's office. "Leland in?" "Oh, he's in." Marta's voice cooled. "Door closed. Blinds half down. That means he's either handling a problem or becoming one." Conrad carried the report folder down the hallway. Leland Cross's office sat at the back of the building, away from the draft of the inspection doors. It was neat in the way some rooms became neat, not from care, but from fear of disorder. A framed certificate hung perfectly level. Pens rested in a black holder. A small retirement calendar stood beside the monitor, with dates crossed off in careful blue ink. Leland looked up as Conrad entered. He was 57, clean-shaven, silver hair combed into place, navy sweater over a pale shirt, station badge clipped straight as a soldier on parade. His face was mild, his eyes were not. "Close the door," Leland said. Conrad did not sit. "I'm submitting the report package," he said. "Station records, camera timestamps, witness notes, veterinary intake, transport irregularities, and Casey Dunmore's statement." Leland folded his hands on the desk. "No, you're not." The words were soft enough to pass for concern. Conrad placed the folder on the desk anyway. Leland did not touch it. "I've reviewed what happened last night," he said. "You acted beyond reasonable threshold. You escalated a minor freight irregularity into an interagency incident. There was a live dog in a locked cage. There was an animal found in a container after you delayed a priority shipment and involved State Patrol." Conrad studied him. Language was a marvelous tool. In the right mouth, it could build a bridge. In the wrong one, it could bury a body and call the dirt procedure. Leland continued, "A sound in a trailer is not by itself a federal accusation. A driver's nerves are not probable cause for a conspiracy. You know this." Hal Rusk witnessed the sound. Trooper Rusk witnessed enough to justify opening the container. That does not justify the claims you are preparing to make. The claims are supported by records. Records you and Marta Bell have been pulling outside your assigned scope. Conrad's jaw tightened. Station logs are within our scope. Not when used to build a personal case against a carrier. Outside the office, a truck horn sounded, long and low. It rolled through the wall like a warning from some iron animal crossing a snowy plain. Leland leaned back. "Conrad, listen to me. You are a valued employee, but your history is not invisible." There it was, not a knife, something smaller and cleaner, a paper cut placed exactly where the skin was thin. Leland lowered his voice. "You have had sleep issues, hypervigilance. You've told us enough for accommodations. I respected that. But if you turn this into a crusade, the question will be whether your judgment was compromised." Conrad did not move. Inside him, the old doors opened. A room, a hallway, a mirror checked 3 times. Men smiling politely while deciding his wound made his truth cheaper. He placed both hands on the back of the chair in front of him, slowly, deliberately. "This is not about my sleep." "No," Leland said, almost kindly. "But others may not see it that way." Conrad looked at the folder lying between them. "Why are you afraid of the report?" Leland's eyes flicked down. "Only once. Enough." "I'm afraid," Leland said, "of liability, of overreach, of this station being accused of interfering with lawful commerce because an exhausted former serviceman heard something in a truck. Marta heard it. Marta is loyal to you. Hal heard it. Hal authorized an inspection, not a crusade. Nadine Keller found false documents. Nadine Keller has not issued an enforcement finding." Conrad studied Leland's face, the clean sweater, the perfect badge, the mild voice, the eyes that would not settle on the folder. "How many?" Conrad asked. Leland's expression tightened. "How many what? Priority fees?" The office seemed to shrink. Leland said nothing. Conrad did not raise his voice. "North Line, how many times?" Leland stood then, not in anger, but as if the chair had betrayed him by making him look small. "You need to go home." "That's an answer." No, it is an administrative instruction. Leland opened a drawer and took out a printed form. You are being placed on temporary leave, pending review for procedural conduct. Conrad looked at the paper. Suspension, dressed in clean shoes. The old part of him wanted to strike back with heat, to drag the truth out of Leland by the collar of his sweater. But Ridge's tired amber eyes rose in his mind, and with them came the memory of the dog stepping out of the cage one paw at a time because no one had rushed him. Conrad picked up the folder. Leland's face changed. Leave it. No. That report contains station material. It contains copies of station material already witnessed by State Patrol and forwarded for review. Leland's softness cracked. Do not make this worse. Conrad looked at him then and saw not a monster, not a mastermind, not the kind of villain stories preferred because they were easy to hate. He saw a tired man near retirement who had made a small compromise, then another, until the road behind him was lined with things he had chosen not to hear. You opened the gate, Conrad said. Leland's mouth moved, but no words came. Maybe you didn't build what walked through it, but you opened it? For a second, shame crossed Leland's face so clearly that Conrad almost pitied him. Then the shade came down. Get out, Leland said. Conrad did. Marta was standing near the copier when he returned to the main office. She took one look at his face and said, That bad? Temporary leave. She absorbed it with a single sharp nod. Good. Means he's scared. Conrad looked at her. That's your optimism? My optimism is usually armed with office supplies. Before Conrad could answer, Marta's phone buzzed on the counter. Then Conrad's. Then the clinic line rang through Marta's forwarded contact. All three sounds struck within the same breath. Marta answered first. Her face changed. Conrad, she said, it's Lorna. He took the call. Lorna Keene did not waste words. Someone came for Ridge. The world went quiet around him. Is he safe? Yes, he's here with me now. Conrad was already moving. I left him at the house. I know. I sent June from the clinic to check on him because I didn't like the way the morning felt. She found a Northline transport van parked near your driveway. Driver claimed the company had paperwork authorizing animal retrieval. June called me. I told her to keep him talking and bring Ridge in through the side door. Conrad's grip tightened on the phone. Description? Male, mid-30s, Northline jacket, no proper animal transport credentials. Paperwork had Ridge listed as company property. Company property. The words were a cold hand at the back of Conrad's neck. I'm coming, he said. Conrad, Lorna said. He stopped at the office door. Her voice was steady but urgent. Ridge stood between June and that man. He is weak, but he stood. He did not growl loud. He did not lunge. He simply made it clear no one was walking past him. Conrad closed his eyes. Not from relief, from the ache of it. A dog who could barely keep his balance had still chosen the doorway. Again. I'll be there in 10, Conrad said. Marta grabbed her coat. I'm driving. You look like thunder wearing pants. Conrad did not argue. The clinic parking lot was bright with snow when they arrived. Lorna met them at the side entrance, her cardigan replaced by a heavy coat, her face calm in the dangerous way of women who had already decided they would not be moved. Inside, Ridge lay on a blanket in the exam room, breathing harder than Conrad liked, but alert. His ears lifted when Conrad entered. His tail did not wag. He was too tired for that. Instead, he placed his chin down and blinked once. Conrad crouched beside him. Bad morning? He asked softly. Ridge exhaled through his nose. Marta whispered, Same, sweetheart. Lorna handed Conrad a copy of the retrieval papers. Fake authorization. It references Northline as contracted handler. It uses the collar code, not the name. Conrad read the line. RM-17, Gian Gauss Lot 406C, property subject to carrier reclamation. His vision sharpened until the paper seemed carved from ice. Lorna continued. I refused release. I documented the visit. June got the van plate. I called Nadine. And? She's escalating. As if summoned by her name, Nadine Keller appeared on the clinic speaker minutes later. Her voice was no longer merely analytical. It had acquired steel. I forwarded the documents to Special Agent Mara Ellison, Nadine said. Federal Transport Smuggling Unit. She is cautious, but she will review the package now. Marta leaned toward the phone. Tell her to hurry politely. I told her the records may indicate an active movement of animals under false freight cover, Nadine replied. That is much better than my version. Conrad stayed beside Ridge, one hand resting near the dog's paw. 2 hours later, Mara Ellison walked into the clinic without wasting motion. She was 49, tall enough to hold a room without raising her voice, with dark hair threaded with silver and tied low at her neck. She wore a navy winter coat over dark field clothes, federal credentials clipped inside the lapel. Her face was composed, angular, skeptical. She looked like someone who had learned not to believe sad stories until the documents had bled truth under pressure. Her eyes went first to Ridge, then to Conrad. Mr. Vail. Conrad, I understand you are currently on temporary leave from the way station. Marta muttered, under suspiciously convenient timing. Mara did not smile. Convenience is not evidence. No, Conrad said, but sometimes it points. Mara's gaze held his for a moment. Sometimes. She set a tablet on Lorna's counter. I've reviewed the initial package. Camera footage. Trooper Rusk's seal opening record. Veterinary intake. Temperature discrepancy. False retrieval document. Nadine Keller's certificate analysis. Casey Dunmore's preliminary statement. And? Lorna asked. And it is enough to open a formal review, Mara said. Not enough to accuse everyone you suspect. Not enough to move like a storm. Enough to start. Conrad understood the boundary. He respected it more than he liked it. Mara turned to him. You do not get to freelance this. I wasn't planning to. Marta coughed. Conrad glanced at her. She looked away with saintly innocence. Mara continued. If this expands, you provide records, context, and witness statements. You do not confront Northline employees. You do not approach Brightwater Cold Storage. You do not decide your instincts outrank a case file. Conrad looked at Ridge. The dog's eyes were open again, watching Mara as if judging whether she belonged in the room. My instincts found him, Conrad said. Mara's expression did not soften, but it changed, slightly. Then let the evidence keep him from being buried again. That landed, not as a reprimand, as an offer. Before Conrad could answer, Hal Rusk entered carrying another statement folder. Casey Dunmore followed behind him, pale, sleepless, looking like a man who had run out of excuses and found the emptiness frightening. Mara turned. Mr. Dunmore. Casey swallowed. I need to tell you something. Hal placed the folder down. He asked to amend his statement. Casey looked at Conrad first, then at Ridge, then at Mara. I got a message from Grady last night after the stop, he said. I deleted it, but it may still be on my phone backup. He said if the shipment was compromised, they'd move the last batch early. Mara became very still. What last batch? I don't know how many. Casey's voice cracked. I don't. He never told me numbers. He called it the final lot before the route closes. Where? Casey rubbed the steel ring on his finger. His hand shook so badly the ring clicked softly. Brightwater, he said. He said everything leaves Brightwater before dawn in a few days. No one spoke. Outside the clinic window, sunlight flashed across the snow, too bright, almost beautiful. Inside, the name Brightwater sat among them like a door just unlocked. Mara took Casey's phone, documented custody, and began issuing instructions. Nadine remained on speaker. Hal called in routing support. Marta pulled station records again. Lorna checked Ridge's breathing because work was how she kept fear from taking up too much space. Conrad stood in the middle of it all and, for once, did not try to command the room. That was harder than he expected. Old training told him to move, to seize the center, to take the shortest path between danger and action. But this was not a beach, not a house at night, not a mission hidden under moonless sky. This was paperwork, jurisdiction, chain of custody, patience. This was a different kind of battlefield. Ridge shifted on the blanket and pressed his muzzle against Conrad's boot, not stopping him this time, grounding him. Conrad looked down. "All right," he whispered. By late afternoon, Mara had what she needed to begin the next step. Conrad was not cleared to return to work. Leland had not called. Northline had not responded to the false retrieval document. The world, with all its clean roads and shining fields, continued pretending it was normal. Conrad drove home under a sky the color of cold milk. Ridge lay across the back seat on Lorna's blanket, tired from the clinic but unwilling to remain behind. Lorna had allowed it only after threatening Conrad with a list of consequences so specific that even Marta had looked impressed. At the house, Conrad helped Ridge inside. The rooms felt different now. Not warmer exactly, more occupied. The silence had weight, but not teeth. Conrad set Ridge's water down, checked the heater, locked the front door once, then twice. His hand rose again. A fourth check waited for him. Not the old third, something beyond it. The day had been too full. Leland's quiet betrayal, the fake retrieval papers, Mara's measured skepticism, Casey's final lot, Brightwater before dawn. Fear had found new material to build with. Conrad's fingers hovered over the lock. Ridge came slowly from the blanket by the heater. He did not sit in judgment this time. He did not block the door. He simply leaned his head against Conrad's leg, the weight gentle, warm, and real. Conrad looked down. He did not feel brave. He did not feel healed. He felt tired, angry, afraid of what Brightwater might hold, afraid of what good men had already allowed to pass through clean gates. But he was not alone at the door. That was not everything. It was enough for one breath. Conrad lowered his hand from the lock and rested it on Ridge's head. Outside, snowlight filled the Nebraska evening. Inside, man and dog stood together before the closed door, listening to the quiet, not as an enemy, but as something they might yet learn to survive. Brightwater cold storage looked harmless from a distance. That was the first thing Conrad Vail hated about it. The building stood alone beyond a service road cut through white fields, its roof softened by snow, its metal walls shining faintly under the pale winter sky. A rail spur ran behind it like a dark seam stitched across the Nebraska plain. Tire tracks curved through the lot in black lines, neat and practical, as if the place existed only to move boxes from one kind of coal to another. No barking reached the road. No alarm split the morning. No villain stood outside, wearing guilt on his face. Brightwater looked like a warehouse, and that made it worse. Conrad sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked federal vehicle half a mile away, hands still, shoulders quiet, eyes fixed on the building. He wore his dark winter jacket over the olive military t-shirt he had owned too long to call clothing and too personally to throw away. Beneath it, the silver chain rested against his chest. Beside him, Special Agent Mara Ellison reviewed the final notes on her tablet. She had slept less than anyone and looked least affected by it. Dark hair threaded with silver was tied low at her neck. Her navy coat lay open just enough to show federal credentials clipped inside. "You stay outside the operation line," she said without looking up. Conrad did not answer at once. The old part of him wanted to dislike her for saying it. That part spoke in angles and entry points, in doorways and threats, in the hard language of men trained to move toward danger before fear could put on its boots. It told him he should be first through the door. It told him he had heard Ridge in the container. He had followed the code. He had carried the weight. But that was the old kingdom. This one had different laws, evidence bags, search authority, chain of custody, witness lines, probable cause built not from instinct alone, but from every small fact refusing to die. Mara finally looked at him. "Conrad, I heard you. I need more than that." He turned from the warehouse to her. "I stay outside the operation line," he said. "I provide context if asked. I do not approach suspects. I do not enter without your instruction." Mara held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "Good." In the back seat, Marta Bell sat bundled in a thick coat with her red thermos between her knees and a laptop balanced on a hard case. She had refused to stay behind because, as she put it, if my logs are going to become federal evidence, they deserve maternal supervision. Mara had allowed her close enough to assist with timestamps, not close enough to become a problem. Trooper Hal Rusk stood outside by his patrol vehicle, speaking quietly with two uniformed officers. His hat was dusted with snow. His notebook was already out. Nadine Keller was on the phone from the command vehicle, cross-checking facility codes and transport certificates in real time. Her voice came through the radio now and then, crisp as paper-slicing air. Dr. Lorna Keene was not at Brightwater. Neither was Ridge. That had been Conrad's condition and Lorna's command, both. The German shepherd remained at the clinic, resting under warm blankets, guarded by Lorna, June, and a locked door that had been checked by people Conrad trusted. Ridge was not a working dog in this operation, not evidence on legs, not a dramatic tool to point the way toward hidden suffering. He had already done enough by surviving. Still, before Conrad left that morning, Mara had placed a printed photo of Brightwater's exterior on Lorna's counter beside the route map. It had not been meant for Ridge, just paperwork among paperwork. Ridge had seen it anyway. The dog had lifted his head from the blanket. His ears, tired and uneven, rose. His body trembled once, sharply, and he shifted backward half a step before pressing himself against Conrad's leg. No bark, no command, only memory, moving through muscle before language could catch it. Lorna had looked at Conrad then, and Conrad had understood without needing her to say it. Ridge had been here, not legally, not in records, not as a name, but some part of him remembered the shape of the place. Conrad had knelt beside him and rested a hand near the dog's chest until the trembling eased. "I won't take you back there," he had said. Ridge had leaned into him as if accepting not comfort, but a vow. Now Brightwater sat under the morning sun, quiet as a sealed tomb. Mara's radio clicked. "Team 1 in position," Hal's voice followed. "South entrance covered." Another voice. "Railside loading dock clear." Mara lifted the radio. "Proceed on warrant. Document all entries." The operation did not explode. It unfolded. That was what Conrad had to learn to respect. Vehicles moved in without sirens, tires crunching over packed snow. Agents stepped out, visible but controlled. Hal and two officers moved toward the administrative entrance. Another team approached the loading bay. Mara stepped from the car and motioned Conrad to stay behind the marked evidence perimeter. He did. It cost him something. Marta watched him from the back seat. "You look like a dog told to stay while somebody throws a steak." "Helpful. I specialize in spiritual support." He almost smiled. Then the warehouse door opened. A man in a logistics jacket appeared, with both hands raised halfway, confused or pretending well. Behind him, the interior lights of Brightwater glowed a tired fluorescent white. Voices carried over the radio. Questions, names, instructions. The calm thunder of authority arriving with paperwork sharp enough to cut through lies. Mara entered with the second team. Conrad remained outside. Snow fell lightly again, small, bright flecks crossing the air. He looked toward the rail spur, the loading dock, the stacks of pallets visible through an open bay door. Everything was ordinary. Forklift marks, plastic wrap, cardboard, cold air rolling out in steady waves. The place did not look evil. Conrad thought of Leland Cross's clean office, Grady Osmond's invisible schedules, certificates too tidy to question. Evil rarely looked like a beast in stories. More often, it looked like a form filled out correctly by a man who had stopped caring what the form covered. Mara's voice came through the radio. "We have secondary storage behind labeled product rows. Stand by." Marta's fingers froze over her keyboard. Hal's voice followed, lower. "Pallet wall. Similar construction." Conrad closed his eyes for 1 second. Not again, he thought. Then, because the world was cruel enough to answer, the radio crackled. "Live animals located." Marta whispered something too soft to hear. Conrad opened his eyes. His body wanted to move. Every nerve rose like a soldier hearing the horn. He stayed. Mara's voice cut through again. Controlled, but changed. "Multiple dogs. Request veterinary support forward. Lorna, if you are on channel, prepare clinic intake. We'll need transport and warming supplies." Lorna's voice answered from the clinic, steady but tight. "Ready." Conrad stood behind the line while other people carried the first blankets in. He had never hated obedience more. Then he remembered Ridge's muzzle against his sleeve in the service vehicle. The way the dog had not rushed the cage door, even when it opened. The dignity of choosing one step at a time. Conrad drew one breath, then another. He let the team work. Inside Brightwater, the hidden area lay beyond legitimate cargo, wrapped food products, clean labels, the respectable face of commerce. Behind them, in a side chamber colder than the rest of the building, stood the transport cages. 9 dogs, not a wall of nameless suffering, not to those who entered. Mara saw that immediately. "Photograph each cage before movement," she ordered. "Then get them warm." The first was an older German Shepherd female with a graying muzzle and watchful brown eyes. She stood unsteadily, but kept nudging a folded scrap of blanket toward the cage beside hers, where a smaller mixed-breed dog shook against the bars. One of the agents said, "She's trying to share it." "Mabel," Lorna said over the radio when the image came through to her. "Call her Mabel for intake." No one argued. The name landed gently inside the cold room and changed it. The next was a lean Belgian Malinois, ribs too visible beneath a short coat, ears high, gaze sharp and silent. He did not bark. He watched hands, not faces. Hands. Like somewhere in his life, the hand had meant command, food, correction, release, and he had learned to wait for which god it would become. "Knox," Hal said quietly. Mara glanced at him. He cleared his throat. "If we're naming them." "Knox," Mara confirmed. The third, a yellow mixed-breed dog, pressed herself flat at the back of her cage until one of the officers crouched low and placed a shallow cap of water inside. She did not move at first, then her nose trembled. She crept forward, took 3 tiny laps, and her tail gave a single, frightened wag as if hope embarrassed her. Marta heard the description on radio and said, "Sunday." Conrad looked at her. She shrugged, eyes bright. "Because she deserves one." The names continued only as needed for intake, not sentiment, not performance. Names kept records honest. Names made it harder for anyone to call them units. The dogs were cold, dehydrated, frightened, but alive. The team moved with care, no shouting, no dramatic heroics, just blankets, water, documentation, soft voices, cage numbers recorded beside the names that would replace them. Conrad stood outside as each dog was carried or guided from the building. Mabel came first, wrapped in gray fleece, muzzle lifted despite exhaustion. Her eyes moved over the snowy lot and settled briefly on Conrad. He did not know why that made him straighten. Knox came next, walking on his own because pride seemed to be the only thing keeping his legs from shaking. He glanced at every doorway, every vehicle, every person, filing the world away like Conrad did. Sunday had to be carried. She tucked her nose into the blanket and refused to look up until Marta stepped closer and whispered, "You and me both, darling. Mornings are suspicious." The little tail moved once beneath the fleece. That nearly broke Conrad more than grief would have. The operation kept moving. Evidence crates came out, clipboards, hard drives, printed routes, old logs, seal rolls, a laptop from the dispatch office. Hal exited with a face like winter stone. Then Mara's voice came over the radio. "Grady Osmond located. Administrative office. Attempted data transfer in progress. Secured." Conrad looked toward the building. A few minutes later, Grady came out between two agents. He was smaller than Conrad expected. Not weak, not harmless. Just smaller than the shadow he had cast. He wore a black logistics coat over a pale blue shirt, hair combed back too carefully for a warehouse morning. His face was narrow, his eyes a washed-out gray. He looked irritated, not ashamed, like a man delayed at an airport by people too ordinary to understand his importance. He saw Conrad near the evidence line. Recognition passed over his face, quick and sharp. Mara noticed. "You know him?" Grady smiled faintly. "I know of him. The way station hero." Conrad did not move. Mara handed off instructions to another agent, then allowed Grady to be paused a few feet away while his custody was documented. She did not stage a confrontation. She was too professional for that. But Grady looked at Conrad anyway. "You have no idea what you interrupted," he said. Conrad's voice was even. "A shipment." Grady's smile thinned. "A system." Marta stood a few paces behind Conrad, thermos clutched like a ceremonial club. Grady's eyes flicked toward one of the transport vehicles where Mabel lay wrapped in blankets. Those dogs were already written off, failed placements, cost centers. Nobody wanted the responsibility until people like you needed a moral play. Conrad thought of Ridge trembling at the Brightwater photograph. He thought of Raylan's hand in the old photo, resting on the head of a dog that trusted him. Raylan wanted the responsibility, Conrad said. For the first time, Grady's polished face shifted, only slightly. Enough. "Raylan ruined himself," Grady said. "Always did. He chose dogs over family, over common sense, over a future. He thought caring made him noble. It made him useful to no one." The snow had stopped falling. The lot grew very quiet. Conrad stepped closer, but not past the line. That mattered. He wanted Grady to see it. He wanted him to understand that a man could be angry and still not be ruled by it. "Raylan didn't choose dogs over people," Conrad said. "He chose living beings over profit. You never learned the difference." Grady's mouth tightened. Mara signaled the agents to move him. As Grady was led away, one of the evidence technicians brought out the old dispatch phone, sealed in a bag. The black device caught the morning light, small and plain and ugly with what it had carried. Conrad watched it pass. No grand speech could compete with evidence in a plastic bag. That was another lesson this new battlefield had taught him. By late morning, the last dog was removed from Brightwater. The warehouse stood open behind them, its hidden chamber photographed, its false walls dismantled, its respectable face cut away. Brightwater had not changed shape, not physically. But now the truth had entered it with cameras, case numbers, warm blankets, and names. Mara approached Conrad near the evidence perimeter. "You did well," she said. He almost answered with a deflection. Instead, he said, "I didn't do much." "You stayed where I told you." "That felt like less." "It wasn't." He looked toward the transport vehicles. Mabel, Knox, Sunday, and the others were being prepared for the clinic. Lorna's team would meet them halfway. Ridge would smell them soon, Conrad thought. Maybe not today. Maybe not close. But some part of him would know. Marta walked over, eyes tired, nose red from the cold. "For the record, I hated every second of you being mature." Conrad finally smiled. "Same." Hal came to stand beside them. He looked at the warehouse, then at the dogs, then at Conrad. "Not bad for a noisy refrigerator," he said. Conrad looked at him. Hal's mustache twitched. "That was an apology, Vail. Don't make me decorate it." Marta lifted her thermos. Beautiful. Gruff, emotionally constipated, but beautiful. The wind moved across the field, soft now. The rail spur behind Brightwater shone dark against the snow, no longer a secret road, only metal under morning light. As the transport vehicles pulled away with the rescued dogs, the sun broke through a gap in the clouds. It spilled across the warehouse roof and flashed along the open metal doors until they glowed silver, like the edge of a sword drawn out of ice. Conrad stood outside the evidence line and watched. He was not the man who had kicked down the door. He was not the lone warrior at the center of the tale. He was a witness, a keeper of small sounds, a man who had brought the right truth to the right hands and then learned, with difficulty, to let those hands work. For once, the truth had traveled farther than his reach. And in the white morning beyond Brightwater cold storage, that was enough. After Brightwater, the roads did not change. That was what Conrad Vail noticed first. I-80 still carried its long river of trucks through Nebraska. Diesel engines still growled beneath the winter sky. Tires still hissed over salted pavement. At the way station, snow still gathered along the concrete barriers, melted under the lights, and froze again by morning. The world had a stubborn talent for continuing. But beneath that ordinary motion, something had shifted. North Line Meridian Freight was placed under full federal investigation. Routes were frozen by legal order. Trailers were inspected. Dispatch records were seized. Red Mesa K-9 Evaluation's old files were reopened. Nadine Keller traced health certificates, transfer codes, inactive facility numbers, and signatures that had been borrowed from older documents like masks worn by thieves in clean offices. Mara Ellison widened the case beyond Nebraska. She did not promise justice quickly. Mara was too honest for that. She spoke of review periods, subpoenas, cooperating agencies, and records that would take weeks to untangle. But when she stood in Dr. Lorna Keene's clinic and looked at the wall of intake forms for the rescued dogs, she said one thing Conrad believed. This does not go back into a drawer. For Raylan Voss, that mattered. His old complaint was restored to the active file. The preliminary report he had written before disappearing was no longer a forgotten attachment buried beneath safer paperwork. His family was notified that he had not abandoned the work, had not simply walked away, had not become a rumor because he lacked courage. He had knocked. No one had opened. 2 years later, Ridge had scratched at steel, and the sound had carried farther than Raylan's first warning ever had. Conrad thought about that often. Some men became ghosts because they were gone. Others became ghosts because the living found it convenient not to hear them. Raylan Voss had been the second kind for too long. Leland Cross was suspended from the way station pending review. Conrad saw him only once after Brightwater, standing outside the supervisor's office with a cardboard box in his arms. His badge was clipped to the box lid. His sweater was clean. His hair was combed. He looked exactly like himself, and somehow smaller. He did not look like a monster. That made it harder. Conrad had wanted him to look like one. It would have made anger simpler, but Leland looked like a man who had sold his conscience in coins so small he had not noticed the weight leaving his pockets. A waived inspection here, a priority clearance there. A favor called efficiency. A silence called professionalism. When their eyes met, Leland looked away first. Conrad did not follow him. There were gates a man could open for another, and gates he had to close by himself. Casey Dunmore became a witness. No one treated him like a hero. Conrad was glad of that. Casey had carried what he should have questioned. He had wanted to believe the sounds were harmless, because believing otherwise would have required a braver life. But he gave the messages, the backup files, the route names, and the fear he had swallowed until it made him sick. Mara took his statement. Hal Rusk stood in the room. Marta brought coffee and did not offer comfort she did not mean. When Casey looked at Conrad and said, "I should have stopped sooner," Conrad did not absolve him. He only said, "Then don't stop now." It was not forgiveness. It was a road. At Lorna's clinic, the rescued dogs began the slow work of becoming more than evidence. Mabel, the older German shepherd, claimed the corner nearest the radiator and kept dragging blankets toward every dog within reach, as if age had made her a tired queen of a damaged kingdom. Knox, the Belgian Malinois, watched every hand for days before deciding Lorna's hands usually brought water, food, or a towel. Sunday, the yellow mixed breed, hid beneath a desk until Marta sat on the floor beside her with a slice of plain toast and a lecture about how both of them had questionable social habits but excellent survival instincts. The tail wag came 20 minutes later. Marta called it a major diplomatic breakthrough. Hal said it was the first negotiation in history settled by toast. Lorna's clinic changed too. The artificial pine tree remained in the corner long past any reasonable season. Extra kennels arrived. Volunteers brought towels, blankets, and food. The waiting room smelled of coffee, antiseptic, wet fur, and something warmer than all of them: the stubborn belief that what had been reduced to cargo could be restored to care. Ridge healed more quietly. He did not become a legend. No newspaper photo captured him standing noble against a sunrise. No one put a medal around his neck. He did not need one. Ridge had survived the hidden place, and survival itself was heavy enough. His strength returned in small increments: a steadier step across Conrad's kitchen, a fuller drink from the water bowl, one careful bark when a delivery truck stopped too long near the driveway. His black and gold coat regained its shine. The pale lightning mark along his forehead became clearer, and the dark saddle across his back looked less like shadow and more like armor. He still startled at metal clicks. He still woke when the heater gave a hard knock in the wall. But he learned. A hand could set down a bowl and leave it. A door could open without becoming a cage. A blanket could mean warmth, not capture. Conrad learned too, though he was less graceful about it. He still woke at night. Sometimes he sat upright before he knew he had moved, heart hammering, one hand already searching for the old map of exits inside his skull. Sometimes he stood in the kitchen at 3 a.m. and listened to the wind comb the snow along the siding. Sometimes he checked the back window even though there was nothing outside but moonlight and a crooked fence post. Ridge never scolded him. That was not how the dog worked. Ridge simply appeared. A soft step in the dark, a warm head against Conrad's thigh, amber eyes catching the weak kitchen light, not demanding peace, only sharing the watch. That was different from being cured. It was better in some ways. Cures belong to stories that wanted pain to leave politely before the final page. Conrad no longer believed in such tidy miracles. He believed in smaller things now. A dog breathing at the foot of the bed, Marta's terrible coffee, Lorna's instructions taped to his refrigerator, Hal pretending not to care, Nadine's emails arriving at odd hours with subject lines so dry they almost sounded like jokes, Mara's rare, brief updates that always ended with, "Still moving, still moving." That became enough. One morning, a week after Brightwater, Conrad took Ridge to the diner near the truck stop. The sky was bright. Snow lay thin over the fields, not storm snow now, but soft, clean snow that made the world seem newly painted. Ridge wore a simple harness and a new metal tag beside the old collar plate. Conrad had kept the old plate because Lorna said evidence photographs were complete, and because he could not bring himself to throw away what Ridge had survived. The new tag read, Ridge Vail. The old code remained above it. RM-17, slot 4066C. Past and present touching, but no longer agreeing. Inside the diner, Marta sat in a booth with Hal Rusk, arguing over whether coffee should be strong enough to qualify as a construction material. Hal lifted his cup. "This could strip paint off my patrol car." Marta looked pleased. Finally, a man with culture. Ridge settled beneath the table. Not perfectly. Not like a trained service dog in a brochure. He checked the door, the kitchen, the window, then rested his chin near Conrad's boot. Marta watched him. "He's doing better." Conrad nodded. "So am I." The words surprised him after they came out. Marta did not make a joke. Hal looked into his coffee as if the answer might embarrass him less from there. After a moment, Marta reached under the table and offered Ridge a small piece of toast. Ridge sniffed, considered the moral complexity of diner food, then accepted. "He has standards," Conrad said. "He has trauma," Marta replied. "Let him enjoy carbohydrates." Hal nodded solemnly. Medical advice. The laughter that followed was not loud. It did not need to be. That afternoon, Conrad signed the adoption papers at Lorna's clinic. Lorna handed him the folder with the same stern expression she used for medication schedules and irresponsible dog owners. "This is not symbolic," she said. "This means vaccinations, follow-ups, proper feeding, no overexertion, and calling me before you decide something is fine, because you're both pretending to be tough." Conrad took the pen. "Understood." "Do you?" Marta, standing behind him, said. "He understands emotionally. Legally, we'll supervise." Ridge sat beside Conrad's chair. He leaned, not much, just enough for Conrad to feel the weight. Conrad signed. The pen moved across the paper, and just like that, a dog who had been a lot number became a household member in black ink. Lorna checked the form, then looked at Ridge. "Congratulations, Mr. Vail. You've acquired a veteran with opinions." Conrad looked down at the German Shepherd. Ridge looked back. "Seems fair," Conrad said. That night, snow returned. It came lightly after sundown, tracing the window glass, softening the porch rail, covering the tire tracks in the drive. Conrad stood in his small house and listened to it fall. The kitchen was warm. Ridge's water bowl sat near the wall. His blanket lay beside the bed now, though Ridge had already decided the floor at the foot of the bed was a more strategic position. Conrad moved through his evening routine. Coffee cup rinsed, porch light checked, back window glanced at, not studied. Front door locked once, then twice. His hand remained on the deadbolt. The third check waited like an old god asking for tribute. For years, Conrad had paid it without question. A turn of the lock, a glance at the frame, a test of the handle. Not because it truly made him safe, but because fear had learned to speak in the voice of responsibility. Behind him, Ridge lifted his head. The dog's ears rose, large and shadowed in the dim bedroom light, like two gray moons listening over a winter field. He did not stand. He did not block the door. He did not place a paw on Conrad's boot. He simply watched. Present. Awake enough. Trusting enough. Conrad looked at the lock, then at Ridge. The room was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. A tired smile moved across Conrad's face. "All right, officer," he said softly. He let go of the deadbolt. The old fear did not vanish. It did not dissolve in music or light. It did not bow out of the room like a defeated villain. It remained where it had always lived, somewhere beneath the ribs, somewhere near the doors memory kept building. But it was smaller now, or perhaps Conrad was not carrying it alone. He turned off the lamp. In the darkness, Ridge settled with a long breath. Conrad lay down, listening to the dog's breathing at the foot of the bed. Outside, Nebraska spread white and quiet beneath the falling snow, like a great blanket drawn over a wounded world. For a while, Conrad waited for sleep to break apart. It did not. The wind moved gently against the house. A truck passed far away on the interstate, its sound low and distant, a steel river continuing toward dawn. Ridge sighed once. Conrad's hand relaxed on top of the blanket. The door remained locked twice, not 3 times. And in that small surrender, no larger than a breath, Conrad Vail slept through the night for the first time in years, not because every danger had been named, and not because every wound had closed, but because a loyal soul kept watch in the dark, and at last Conrad trusted the morning to come. Sometimes the smallest sound is the one heaven asks us not to ignore. Conrad did not save Ridge because he was fearless. He saved him because he listened when it would have been easier to move on. And in the end, Ridge gave Conrad something no locked door ever could: the quiet courage to rest. May this story remind us to notice the hidden cries around us, to choose mercy when no one is watching, and to believe that even in the coldest season, grace can still find a way in. If Ridge and Conrad's journey touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, hope, and second chances. May peace follow you tonight, and may you never miss the small miracle waiting at your door.